Grandma's house was colder in summer than winter, the kind of old that creaked not because it was falling apart, but because it remembered things like hunger and long silences between women who had nothing left to say. Cassie and I grew up inside that hush, two girls abandoned in different ways by the same woman who birthed us. Mama didn't run away, she just evaporated first in spirit, then in flesh. Until one day the phone rang and someone said accident and alcohol, and Grandma sat down without a word, like her bones suddenly remembered their weight. She raised us out of obligation, I think, but over time it started to look like love, the kind you don't say out loud because you're too tired to explain it. She sewed our uniforms by hand, made us share a bed until I was 13, taught us how to cook rice that didn't stick and fold sheets sharp enough to cut. Cassie was the one who laughed loud, who threw tantrums so theatrical they made the neighbors close their windows. I was the one who cleaned up afterward, who stood in doorways with my hands behind my back, learning to take up less space. Before we get into it, if you've ever carried a truth too quietly or been made to feel small for how deeply you feel, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. We tell stories for the ones who stayed silent. You're not alone anymore. Our rivalry didn't begin over boys or grades or clothes. It began the night I got the lead in the school play and Cassie wasn't even cast. Grandma didn't cheer. She just turned to Cassie and said, "Maybe next time." That was enough. From that night on, Cassie stopped speaking to me unless there was an audience. She needed someone to look like the villain, and I fit the role too easily. Quiet girls always do. By the time we were both in high school, Cassie had a full script rehearsed about how I was the favorite, the chosen one, the sneaky little thing who always got what she wanted. But Grandma never gave anything without a reason. Every dollar, every favor, every car ride to a job interview was a deal, spoken or not. When Cassie dropped out at 19, Grandma didn't raise her voice, just stopped waking up early. When I graduated, I didn't get a celebration, just a folded check with "for books" written in trembling ink. And even then, Cassie whispered in the kitchen, "She only helped you because you're useful." I believed her. Maybe still do. But I also knew Grandma had watched us closely for years, tracking every selfish choice, every gentle gesture. She knew exactly who we were, even when we didn't. I left town at 22, came back once a year, called often enough to ease guilt, but not so much it reopened wounds. Cassie stayed. Not out of duty, but entitlement. She moved her boyfriends in like rotating furniture, brought drama into the house like stray cats, always sure Grandma would clean up the mess. And she did, until her legs gave out and the only thing she asked was, "Could you get my pills?" And Cassie said, "In a minute," and fell asleep to the sound of the news channel blaring at full volume. That's when Grandma started calling me more often. Just to talk. Just to hear a voice that didn't ask for anything. The trust came up once, maybe twice. Grandma wasn't the type to explain things. But she started asking strange questions, like whether I believed in second chances, or how much a person had to lose before they changed. I didn't know what she meant. I thought she was talking about herself. Maybe she was. Maybe she was trying to say goodbye without saying it. I answered as best I could, told her I loved her, even though that word felt too small, too clean for what we'd been through. When she passed, it felt like a building crumbling silently in the middle of the night. No drama. No final gasp. Just a stillness that made the furniture look different in the morning. Cassie called me crying, loud and broken, but part of me didn't believe it. Not the grief, Cassie was always good at that, but the fact that she sounded surprised. Like she hadn't noticed Grandma slipping away in pieces. Like she hadn't heard the change in her voice, the way I had. The way I'd been trying to prepare for this, even though you can't really prepare for someone like that to be gone. I arrived 2 days later, suitcase in hand, heart clenched. The house was already rearranged. Cassie had moved Grandma's chair to the corner, started redecorating like grief made her allergic to stillness. She looked at me the way people look at wreckage they don't want to admit they caused. "You're just in time for the reading," she said, with a smirk that didn't match her red eyes. And, just like that, I knew. Whatever Grandma had done, however she'd chosen to leave things, Cassie believed she'd won. I smiled then, quietly, and said nothing. Because some stories are best told in silence, until it's time to speak. The sun came through the stained glass like it didn't know we were grieving. Everyone sat too straight, too quiet, the kind of silence that swells before someone decides to make it about themselves. Cassie wore black like a costume. High heels, red lips, Grandma's brooch pinned just above her heart. She stood before they even finished the Lord's Prayer, walked up near the casket like it was a podium. Her voice didn't shake. "I just wanted to say," she began, eyes scanning the room, "Grandma left everything to me." The word everything echoed off the walls. Some of us earned it. People didn't react at first, not because they agreed, but because they weren't sure they'd heard her right. "She said I was the only one who stayed," Cassie went on, hand on her chest now rehearsed. "She said I was the one who knew her best, the one who never left." I glanced at Dad. His eyes were on his hands, folded like someone praying out of guilt. Cassie's voice sharpened, now aimed directly at me. "And some people will learn what it feels like to be left with nothing. You'll be begging me soon, Noelle. Just remember this moment when you do." I didn't say a word, didn't flinch. I just turned to Dad, leaned in slightly. "Should I tell her?" I asked, my voice low but deliberate, "or will you?" He looked up then, startled, caught somewhere between shame and surprise. Cassie laughed under her breath, a little too loud. "There's nothing to tell," she said. "I have the documents. I signed the papers. I own the house, the car, the furniture." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have it all. And you have sentiment, I guess." The room had gone very still. Even the minister had stopped pretending this was normal. Dad stood suddenly, awkward, knocking over his program. "Let's finish the service," he muttered, voice tight, almost brittle. People nodded, relieved to be told what to do. Cassie sat again, smoothed her skirt like she was still on stage, her lips pressed into a line that didn't quite pass for a smile. I stayed standing for a moment, watching her, not angry, just deeply tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying truths in your back pocket, truths that burn but don't speak until asked. I walked out before the final hymn, the way Grandma used to when her knees got stiff. Outside, the air was thick with spring and awkwardness. Aunt Marlene followed me out, clutching her purse like it might blow away. "Was that true?" she whispered, her breath catching. "What she said?" I shrugged, didn't offer details. "Cassie believes it." Marlene pursed her lips. "That girl always did think noise meant power." I watched the wind move through the cemetery, let the silence settle between us. "She's not wrong about the house," I said. "It's in her name." Marlene raised an eyebrow. "And what's in yours?" I looked down at the small envelope in my coat pocket. "Something else entirely." At the reception, people avoided me like grief was contagious. Cassie held court near the casserole table, smiling too brightly, repeating her story like a chorus she couldn't stop singing. She trusted me. She knew who would protect her legacy. I sipped lukewarm punch and waited. It wasn't the time, not yet. Dad approached once, paused beside me, then walked away. That told me everything. I left early, the way Grandma did, quiet, unnoticed, hands full of truth and a coat pocket heavy with unspoken things. The will had been read, but not the letter. That part was still mine. Back at the house, I let myself in slowly, flicked on the porch light out of habit. The kitchen smelled like old flowers and lemon cleaner. I stood in the doorway, listening. Not for voices, but for memory. Grandma's chair was gone, replaced with a velvet armchair Cassie must have ordered fast. I sat at the table, unfolded the envelope. Inside was the amended trust, the instructions, and her handwriting. "Don't correct her in public. Let her feel the power. Then, when the silence hurts more than the truth, tell her what I left behind for you." I folded it again, placed it gently back inside. Cassie had always been loud, but at the funeral, she found a new register, somewhere between performative grief and red carpet confidence. She wore Grandma's favorite scarf like it was hers now, and when the minister paused for the final prayer, she stepped forward, her voice trembling in the way trained singers fake tears. As her only full-time caregiver, it's no surprise Grandma left everything to me, she said, facing the pews like a stage. Some of us give, and others just show up. But don't worry, those who got nothing will eventually beg. She looked at me, smiling like she'd won. The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was discomfort, like everyone suddenly realized they'd misjudged what kind of story they were attending. I didn't say a word. I just turned slightly, caught my dad's eye, and asked quietly, should I tell her? Or will you? He froze, hand tightening on the back of the pew like it was keeping him upright. Cassie laughed, sharp and hollow, but it caught in her throat halfway. She looked around, waiting for someone to back her up, but the energy in the room shifted, just slightly, like the temperature dropped and no one knew why. Dad didn't answer, just stared at the casket like it might open and save him from having to choose. Cassie tried again, her tone a little less triumphant. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't blink. Just wondering who's going to explain the trust. You or him? Her face twitched, the way it used to when Grandma corrected her in front of guests. One of Grandma's old friends leaned toward her husband, whispering, while the minister cleared his throat and gently moved the service along. But the damage was done. Her win was suddenly full of holes. Afterwards, outside in the gravel lot, people formed little circles like storm shelters. Cassie stood under the elm tree, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, eyes flicking up every time someone passed. I stepped toward Dad, but he shook his head, muttering, let her have her moment. I didn't respond. My coat was too warm, my heart too still. It wasn't hers to have, I said, more to myself than him. He winced at that, but didn't disagree. Grief does strange things to people. Or maybe it just reveals them. Either way, this moment had been years in the making. The ride back to the house was silent, Cassie in the front seat, Dad driving like the road was fragile. I sat behind them, watching the back of her head, how she kept adjusting her hair like she knew something had cracked. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned, eyes sharp. You think you're clever, don't you? I shrugged. I think I read the letter Grandma left me. Did you? She didn't answer. Just slammed the door harder than necessary and walked inside. Dad stayed in the car a beat longer. You sure you want to do this now? He asked. She already did. Inside, the house felt wrong. Like someone had moved the walls slightly. Cassie had rearranged everything. Grandma's rocker was gone, replaced with a velvet chair she probably saw on Pinterest. I walked past it without comment, heading straight to the study. The folder was where Grandma said it'd be, tucked behind the dusty encyclopedias on the third shelf. Inside, the trust, the lawyer's name, a note in shaky cursive that simply said, "Give this to her when she asks, not before." I smiled, just barely. Cassie never asked for anything. She demanded. And now she'd have to learn the difference. That night, I slept in the guest room, the one with the slanted ceiling and the box fan that never pointed where you wanted. I left the door open, hoping for air, maybe peace. Cassie passed by once, paused, then kept walking. No words. Just footsteps on hardwood that used to feel like home. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Grandma's last voicemail, how she said, some things can't be fixed, but they can be understood. Maybe that's all I was doing now, not fixing, not fighting, just understanding. Quietly, patiently, in the way she taught me. Morning came slow, the way it always does in a house that's lost its anchor. I woke before the light fully settled, wandered into the kitchen where the kettle hissed and the window over the sink still held Grandma's smudge prints. Cassie was already there, barefoot, wearing one of Grandma's old robes like it was hers now. She didn't look up when I walked in, just stirred her tea and said, "You think I don't know what you're doing?" I sat across from her, reached for the sugar, and answered without heat, "I think you know what Grandma did." That's the difference. The envelope had been left on the table, same one we'd played board games on, same one she once flipped in a tantrum over Monopoly. It sat between us now, thick with everything she didn't know. I pushed it toward her without a word. She didn't touch it at first, just stared at it like it might explode. "She told you," she asked finally. I nodded. "Months ago." She wanted to make sure someone was watching while you weren't. Cassie scoffed. That's rich. I was here, day in, day out. You barely called. Her voice cracked on the last word, barely. She saw what you did, I said, quiet, steady, letting the space do the rest. Cassie looked away then, out the window, like the backyard might rescue her. I didn't push. Just waited. Eventually, her fingers found the flap, slow and unsure. She pulled out the papers, skimmed, then froze. Her lips moved as she read the line about the house being sold. The proceeds moved into a trust, the stipulations marked with clarity. No funds may be distributed to Cassandra until the named executor deems her capable of independence. Her face drained, then tightened like a rope pulled too hard. That's not fair, she whispered, paper trembling in her hands. She said she'd take care of me. I looked at her, really looked, at the mascara smudges, the chipped nails, the fatigue she couldn't quite disguise. She did take care of you for years, more than she should have had to. This, I gestured to the envelope, this is her taking care of you in a different way. Cassie shook her head, like if she denied it hard enough it might vanish. You don't get to decide if I'm capable. I leaned in slightly. She already did. We sat in that tight quiet, the kind that stretches and thins like worn elastic. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome over a funeral dirge. Cassie folded the papers back up, not neatly, just fast. So what, you're in charge now? You get to hand me crumbs? I stood, rinsed my cup, placed it in the sink. I don't want to be in charge. I just want you to stop pretending this house ever owed you anything. She didn't respond. Her hand gripped the envelope like it might fly away. I walked past her, slow, and said over my shoulder, you should read the letter, too. Back in the hallway, I paused beside Grandma's bedroom door. It was cracked open, the same way she used to leave it when we were kids, so she could hear us breathing in our sleep. I pushed it open gently, stepped inside. The room hadn't changed. The quilt still bore her perfume, the books stacked in uneven towers, the rosary tucked in the drawer she kept locked until the end. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the drawer open, found my copy of the letter. I read it again, though I knew it by heart. My darling girls, one of you gave noise, the other gave steadiness. I've loved you both in the ways you could receive. This trust isn't punishment, it's protection from yourself, from bitterness, from forgetting your own worth. Noelle, don't gloat. Cassandra, don't crumble. There's still time for both of you to become the women I saw when you were small, holding each other under that tattered yellow umbrella. Please try. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, breathed deep, then tucked it back in the drawer. Somewhere in the kitchen, Cassie's voice rose in anger, or pain, or both. Cassie didn't leave that day. She lingered like the end of a storm that couldn't quite finish raining. She spent hours moving from room to room, touching objects like they might change their meaning if handled right, stopping in front of photos as if trying to remember who she used to be. I stayed quiet, mostly in the study, answering the attorney's email, confirming I'd received the updated trust paperwork. Around 5, I heard her footsteps outside the door, slow and reluctant. She knocked once, then opened without waiting. I need to stay, she said, eyes rimmed with something raw. I looked up from the desk, nodded slowly. That's fine for now. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, voice quieter than it had been in days. I've got $2,000 left in my account. Rent's due next week. He left last month. Took the dog even. I didn't say anything. She stared at the floor, then added, I wasn't trying to take it from you, you know. I just thought if she loved me, she'd leave something. I stood, walked over to her, leaned against the opposite side of the doorframe. She did leave something. It just wasn't what you expected. Later, we sat on the porch, the air thick with that kind of silence only siblings can share without drowning. She lit a cigarette, something she picked up again last year, and offered me one. I shook my head. You remember when we built that fort under the maple? She asked. You told me it would collapse, and it did. On my head. I smiled, a small one. You screamed like someone shot you. Grandma brought you a bag of frozen peas and told me to stop playing architect. Cassie laughed, a real one this time, though it died fast. She always believed you were meant for more. I wasn't, I said, still watching the road. I just wanted less drama. She looked at me then, like maybe that was the first honest thing I'd ever said to her. It's not fair, she whispered, how love feels like a competition, even when no one says it is. I didn't argue. She took a long drag, then exhaled slowly. What happens next? She asked. With the trust, with the house. I turned to her, measured. You stay for now. You get a job. You show the lawyer progress. When you're steady, I can release some of the funds. Until then, this is what it is. That night, she made pasta, overcooked but edible, and we sat in front of the television like strangers pretending to be sisters. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, how she still chewed with her mouth open, still used too much salt, still filled every space with restless energy. But she also cleaned the dishes without being asked, folded the dish towel, checked on the mail. Small things, quiet things, like maybe she was trying to build something she couldn't name. I didn't thank her. She didn't expect it. We existed in parallel, the way we used to. Days passed like that. Awkward but steady. She started walking to town, applying for jobs. I overheard her on the phone once, telling someone she was between things. She didn't mention the trust, didn't mention the fallout. That surprised me. One afternoon, I found her in Grandma's room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, reading the letter again. She didn't notice I was there. Her lips moved as she read the part about becoming the women Grandma believed we could be. Her fingers trembled just slightly. I backed away, let her have that moment. Some truths are better met alone. A week later, she handed me a folded napkin at breakfast, job offer inside. Waitressing at the diner, minimum wage but full-time. It's a start, she said, almost shy. I nodded. It is. She stood there for a second, like she wanted something, maybe approval, maybe relief. But all I gave her was, I'll let the lawyer know. She smiled then, barely, and reached for her keys. You want me to pick up anything? I handed her Grandma's old shopping list. She laughed when she saw the handwriting. She really wrote eggs, milk, Grace. I shrugged. Guessed she figured we'd forget. The house felt different by fall, like it had learned to exhale again. Cassie started leaving the windows cracked, even on colder days, said the air smelled better when it moved. She worked mornings at the diner, came home tired but softer. She made lists now, groceries, rent, books she meant to read, and taped them to the fridge like small declarations of a future. I didn't hover. I watched from the edges, the way Grandma used to, the way people do when they've loved someone too long to believe in sudden change, but still hope anyway. One night, I found her in the backyard, barefoot in the grass, staring up like she was expecting someone to speak from the sky. She didn't turn when I stepped outside. You remember that summer Grandma made us weed the whole yard, she asked. Said it was character building. I laughed soft. You faked heat stroke and got out of half of it. She grinned, didn't deny it. I used to think she hated me, she said. Because she always looked so tired when I walked in the room. I stood beside her, arms crossed. She wasn't tired of you. She was just tired. Cassie nodded, looked down at her feet, wiggled her toes in the damp soil. It's easier to believe people give up on you than to believe you wore them out. Her voice caught, just for a second, then steadied. I read the letter again last night. The part about the umbrella. I didn't say anything. Just waited. I remember that day, she said. You held it over both of us, even when it meant your shoulder got soaked. I never said thank you. I shrugged. You were 5. You did your best. She looked at me then, really looked, and said, I want to do better. The next week, I got a call from the attorney. Cassie's name was back on the eligibility list, partial funds available for education or relocation. I brought it up over coffee, slid the document across the table. She didn't smile, didn't tear up, just ran her fingers over the edges and whispered, she really thought I'd get there. I nodded. She didn't leave the door closed. She just wanted you to find the handle. Cassie folded the paper slowly, carefully this time, like it was something sacred. I don't want the money yet, she said. I want to finish this on my own. We started painting the kitchen together that weekend. White, with soft green trim, The kind Grandma always said reminded her of spring onions. We played the radio, took turns singing badly, argued about brush strokes. She laughed more that weekend than she had in months, and once, while rinsing out a roller, she looked over her shoulder and said, "This is the first time I felt like I belonged in this house." I didn't answer, just handed her the towel. Belonging, I'd learned, wasn't something you were handed. It was something you slowly earned, one coat at a time. She left in December. Not dramatically, just with a suitcase, a goodbye note, and a calendar taped to the fridge with all her shifts crossed out. I found her toothbrush still in the holder, her coffee mug still in the sink. She hadn't emptied the house, just made space in it again. She called a week later, from a small town an hour away. "Got a room above the bookstore," she said. "They needed help shelving new arrivals." I smiled into the phone. "Sounds like a start." She hesitated, then added, "I didn't take any of the trust. Just wanted you to know." By spring, the house felt like Grandma again. Quiet, but not empty. I hosted a neighbor for tea, sent Cassie books through the mail, planted new bulbs out back. The kitchen stayed green, the list stayed on the fridge, and the envelope with Grandma's letter sat in the drawer, right where she left it. Some days, I still reached for the phone, ready to ask her what she'd think of all this. But then I'd remember the last line of her letter, the one I almost missed. "If silence taught you to listen, let love teach you when to speak." And so I did. The sun came through the stained glass like it didn't know we were grieving. Everyone sat too straight, too quiet, the kind of silence that swells before someone decides to make it about themselves. Cassie wore black like a costume, high heels, red lips, Grandma's brooch pinned just above her heart. She stood before they even finished the Lord's Prayer, walked up near the casket like it was a podium. Her voice didn't shake. "I just wanted to say," she began, eyes scanning the room, "Grandma left everything to me." The word everything echoed off the walls. Some of us earned it. People didn't react at first, not because they agreed, but because they weren't sure they'd heard her right. "She said I was the only one who stayed," Cassie went on, hand on her chest now rehearsed. "She said I was the one who knew her best, the one who never left." I glanced at Dad. His eyes were on his hands, folded like someone praying out of guilt. Cassie's voice sharpened, now aimed directly at me. "And some people will learn what it feels like to be left with nothing. You'll be begging me soon, Noelle. Just remember this moment when you do." I didn't say a word, didn't flinch. I just turned to Dad, leaned in slightly. "Should I tell her?" I asked, my voice low but deliberate, "Or will you?" He looked up then, startled, caught somewhere between shame and surprise. Cassie laughed under her breath, a little too loud. "There's nothing to tell," she said. "I have the documents. I signed the papers. I own the house, the car, the furniture." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have it all. And you have sentiment, I guess." The room had gone very still. Even the minister had stopped pretending this was normal. Dad stood suddenly, awkward, knocking over his program. "Let's finish the service," he muttered, voice tight, almost brittle. People nodded, relieved to be told what to do. Cassie sat again, smoothed her skirt like she was still on stage, her lips pressed into a line that didn't quite pass for a smile. I stayed standing for a moment, watching her, not angry, just deeply tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying truths in your back pocket, truths that burn but don't speak until asked. I walked out before the final hymn, the way Grandma used to when her knees got stiff. Outside, the air was thick with spring and awkwardness. Aunt Marlene followed me out, clutching her purse like it might blow away. "Was that true?" she whispered, her breath catching. "What she said?" I shrugged, didn't offer details. "Cassie believes it." Marlene pursed her lips. "That girl always did think noise meant power." I watched the wind move through the cemetery, let the silence settle between us. "She's not wrong about the house," I said. "It's in her name." Marlene raised an eyebrow. "And what's in yours?" I looked down at the small envelope in my coat pocket. "Something else entirely." At the reception, people avoided me like grief was contagious. Cassie held court near the casserole table, smiling too brightly, repeating her story like a chorus she couldn't stop singing. She trusted me. She knew who would protect her legacy. I sipped lukewarm punch and waited. It wasn't the time, not yet. Dad approached once, paused beside me, then walked away. That told me everything. I left early, the way Grandma did, quiet, unnoticed, hands full of truth and a coat pocket heavy with unspoken things. The will had been read, but not the letter. That part was still mine. Back at the house, I let myself in slowly, flicked on the porch light out of habit. The kitchen smelled like old flowers and lemon cleaner. I stood in the doorway, listening. Not for voices, but for memory. Grandma's chair was gone, replaced with a velvet armchair Cassie must have ordered fast. I sat at the table, unfolded the envelope. Inside was the amended trust, the instructions, and her handwriting. Don't correct her in public. Let her feel the power. Then, when the silence hurts more than the truth, tell her what I left behind for you. I folded it again, placed it gently back inside. If this story settled somewhere in your chest, if it reminded you of something you lived through but never said out loud, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe for more stories that don't scream, but stay with you. And if you feel like it, tell us where you're listening from. We're building a quiet kind of home here.